I'm Avery Grant, 26 years old, founder of Havenlink, a real estate tech startup recently featured in Forbes 30 Under 30. This morning, as the first light of dawn slipped through the tall curtains of my three-story home in Austin, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and standing before me were two faces I hadn't spoken of in years, my parents, each holding a suitcase, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and fragile hope. My father spoke first, his once proud voice now stripped of confidence. "Honey, we're going through a tough time. Could we stay here for a few months?" I looked at them for a long moment, then smiled softly, but enough to silence the air. "Funny, you're the same people who said I'd never amount to anything, remember?" In that moment, I didn't feel anger. Just a strange calm, as if an old wound had finally stopped bleeding. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family and had to rise alone just to prove your worth? And where are you watching this story from today? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to know I'm not alone. I grew up in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, in a beige two-story house with a white picket fence and a perfectly trimmed lawn, the kind of place that looked like the picture of an ideal American family from the outside. My father, Mark Grant, was a civil engineer, a man who lived by rules and ego. My mother, Linda, was a former elementary school teacher who later stayed home to care for the family, though in truth, she spent her days maintaining the illusion of perfection for the neighbors. From an early age, I understood that in their small world, everything revolved around one name: Lily, my older sister. Lily was 3 years older than me, and for as long as I could remember, she was the pride of the family. She had golden hair, a toothpaste, commercial smile, and a natural charm that drew people in. In high school, she was the head cheerleader, crowned spring festival queen, and constantly surrounded by admirers. And me? I was the kid who liked taking apart old radios just to see how they worked, who could spend hours in the garage coding simple programs or tinkering with a homemade drone built from second-hand parts I found at an electronics market. My parents never forbade me from doing what I loved, but their silence was enough to tell me I wasn't what they wanted. When Lily won the title of homecoming queen, my mother threw a small party and invited the entire neighborhood. I still remember her laughing proudly as she said, "She truly has it all." I stood in the corner, holding a plate of cake, listening to my father tell a neighbor, "And Avery? She's into machines. Doesn't really know how to talk to people." That sentence replayed in my head like a broken record, making it harder and harder to speak every time I wanted to share something. Lily was given everything: dance lessons, modeling classes, even a short-term study program in Paris. When I asked to attend a science summer camp, my father simply said, "That's a waste of money. You should study something more practical like Lily." When I asked what practical meant, he replied curtly, "Something that makes a girl respectable." I didn't fully understand, but I knew one thing for sure in our house: respect was measured by appearance, not by substance. One autumn evening, I remember it vividly, I rushed to tell my parents that I'd just won my school's programming competition. The prize was only a certificate and a $100 gift card, but to me, it was everything: a reward for all those late nights I spent teaching myself to code. My mother looked up from her fashion magazine and said flatly, "Good. At least that saves us from buying you a birthday present." Then she turned back to discuss with Lily what dress she should wear to her graduation party. My father said nothing, just nodded slightly, as if I'd told him I'd passed an average exam. I forced a smile, but inside, it felt like someone had locked my chest from the inside, sealing off every bit of air. Lily always knew how to make people love her, and maybe, once upon a time, I tried to do the same. I used to think that if I got better grades, behaved better, maybe my parents would be proud of me the way they were proud of her. But every effort I made only seemed to irritate them more. One day, I told my mother I wanted to study software engineering. She frowned. "That sounds too masculine. You're a girl, why not study something softer, like fashion design? Or maybe Lily can get you into her styling class." I stayed silent. In my family, silence was the only way to avoid getting hurt further. When Lily went off to college, my mother cried the entire ride to the airport, and my father drove her all the way to her dorm, buying her a new laptop, new luggage, and even a supplementary credit card. I stood by the front porch, waving goodbye as Lily laughed and shouted, "I'll send pictures, little bookworm." When the car disappeared down the street, I walked back into the house and was met by a hollow stillness, the air still faintly scented with her perfume. No one said a word. I washed the dishes, wiped the table, and realized no one had asked me if I felt sad. The years that followed didn't change much. My parents lived in the belief that Lily was the family's pride, while I was the stable, low-maintenance one. That was the phrase they often used whenever someone asked about me. "Avery? She's not bad, just ordinary." They said it to neighbors, to relatives, to anyone who would listen. But inside me, every time I heard the word ordinary, something cracked a little more. I began to withdraw. I stopped sharing my achievements, stopped talking about scholarship projects, stopped mentioning that I was taking advanced programming classes at night. I just stayed in my room, wearing my headphones, lost in a world of code, a world where everything made sense, where every line had logic, cause, and effect. Unlike my parents' love, which seemed reserved only for the child they wanted to see. My mother once told me, "You'll never find anyone who'll want to marry you if you keep playing with those machines." It sounded harmless, but to me, it felt like a prophecy she kept repeating to remind me of my place behind Lily, always the shadow. I learned to stay quiet when belittled, to smile when ignored, and to promise myself that one day, my silence would become the loudest sound they'd ever hear. The seed of that wound was planted during a dinner filled with praise for Lily and silence for me, and I didn't yet know that from that very seed, determination would one day grow. That night, the house I grew up in was filled with laughter and the scent of a fancy dinner. My mother had prepared an Italian meal, pasta, red wine, and tiramisu for dessert. I remember sitting in my usual spot, the chair on the right side of the table, where for years I had learned the art of staying quiet and listening to others speak. It should have been just another ordinary evening, but I didn't know it would become the turning point that pushed me to leave everything behind. My father, Mark Grant, sat at the head of the table, dressed in a crisp black suit, his face stern but his eyes gleaming with pride. Lily sat beside our mother, her left hand catching the light with a brand new diamond ring. She was talking about her upcoming engagement to Brandon, a young real estate investor my parents deeply admired. I quietly cut into my steak, listening to Lily's cheerful voice as she talked about the dream house in Houston she and Brandon planned to buy to start their new life together. Everyone at the table congratulated her, their voices filled with admiration. Then my father tapped his wine glass, his tone bright with excitement. "We have a big announcement tonight," he said. He looked around the table, his gaze landing on Lily. "Your mother and I have decided to help you start your life by giving you $300,000 to buy your own condo. You've earned it. A marriage deserves a solid foundation." My mother held Lily's hand, eyes glistening. "You've always made us proud, sweetheart. This is just our way of saying thank you for all the years you've brought honor to this family." The room erupted in applause, the clinking of glasses ringing in the air. I just sat there, motionless. In that moment, I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my chest. As the laughter began to fade, I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, "What about me?" The entire table fell silent for a beat. My father turned toward me, his expression a mix of surprise and irritation, as if I'd asked something I wasn't supposed to. "Avery," he said, emphasizing each word, "you need to be realistic. No one invests in someone without vision." I looked at him, searching for a hint of humor, but there was none. My mother chimed in, her tone sweet yet cold. "Avery, you're not really the ambitious type. You should find a stable, safe job, maybe accounting or teaching. You don't need much." Lily gave a soft laugh, turning to me as if she were comforting me. "Don't be upset, sis. Not everyone takes the same path. You're good with tech, you'll find something small and cute for yourself." Her words sounded harmless, but I could hear the pity beneath every syllable. I set my fork down, my hands trembling slightly, but I forced a smile. $300,000 is a lot, I said. I'm just curious, why does all the help always go one way? My mother sighed, the kind of sigh that carried exhaustion for having to explain the obvious. Because Lily has a clear direction. She knows what she wants. You, on the other hand, spend your time on those strange little tech projects. We just want to make sure our money goes where it counts. I heard the word investment and almost laughed. In their eyes, love was just another kind of investment, and I was clearly the one that didn't pay off. One of my aunts chuckled in agreement. Avery's always been smart, but she kind of lives in her own world. Nobody can quite figure her out. The whole table laughed softly, even my father. He raised his glass, half joking, half serious. Avery might not have leadership qualities, but at least she knows how to follow orders. I didn't respond. I just lowered my head, listening to the sound of forks scraping plates, to Lily's cheerful voice describing the curtain colors she wanted for her new condo. The pain no longer felt like pain, it had turned into a cold emptiness spreading through my body. I looked around the room. Every photo on the wall was of Lily. Lily's graduation, Lily in Paris, Lily smiling next to Brandon. Not a single one of me. It was as if this house had never made space for my existence. After dinner, I helped clear the table. From the living room, my mother called out, "Avery, don't overthink things. Not everyone needs to go far. A simple life can still be a happy one." I stayed silent, just nodded. When I stepped outside to throw the trash away, the Dallas night wind blew hard, carrying the scent of dry grass and the hum of distant traffic. I sat on the porch steps, looking up at the dark sky, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely detached from this place. That night in my room, I opened my laptop and stared at the unfinished plan for an app I'd been designing to connect renters with housing opportunities. I read through every line, then, without thinking, I typed one final sentence at the bottom. I don't need anyone to invest in me. I'll become the most valuable investment myself. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there listening to the ticking clock, replaying every word my parents had said. You have no vision. You're not the successful type. Avery doesn't have leadership qualities. Their voices blended into a haunting symphony that echoed in my mind for years. But beneath the ache, there was something quietly burning, a spark, small but alive, rising from the ashes. I left Dallas on an early summer morning, when the air still smelled of asphalt and sunlight streamed through the old oak trees lining the road. In my trunk were a single suitcase, my old laptop, and just over $5,000 in savings, everything I had after 4 years of college and a few months of part-time work. I didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a note, didn't text anyone. I just stuck a small piece of paper on the kitchen counter that read, "I'll be fine." I locked the door, started the car, and drove away from the street where I'd grown up. The wind rushed through the half-open window, carrying with it the scent of freedom and the quiet ache of a wound I hadn't yet learned to name. I didn't cry. I just felt an emptiness so vast, it almost felt like peace. 3 hours later, I arrived in Austin, a city I chose not because I knew anyone there, but because in that place, I was no one. I rented a small room in an old boarding house on the outskirts of town, where the paint peeled off the walls and the tap water sometimes ran rusty. The landlord was a kind widow named Marjorie who lived with 3 cats. When she handed me the keys, she asked just one question. "Are you here to run away, or to start over?" I smiled faintly and replied, "Maybe a bit of both." On my first day, I got a job at a tech-themed cafe, serving coffee while sneaking in moments to read about AI programming. I worked 10-hour shifts during the day, then came home at night, opened my laptop, and started writing code for the project I called Havenlink. My idea was simple but burning with ambition to build an AI-powered platform that connected renters and landlords directly, cutting out middlemen to save both time and money. I knew thousands had tried before, but no one had done it well enough. And I believed I could. The first few months were painfully long. I slept less than 4 hours a night, living on instant coffee and cheap ramen. Whenever my eyes burned from staring at the screen too long, I'd close them and my father's voice would echo in my head. "You'll never amount to anything." I didn't know why, but that sentence, instead of breaking me, became the fuel behind every line of code I typed. Every time I felt exhausted, I pictured them sitting comfortably in that big house in Dallas, convinced I wouldn't survive. And just imagining that was enough to keep my hands moving. I remember one rainy night vividly. Water leaked through the window frame, wind howling through the cold, dim room. I sat with my knees pulled to my chest, staring at the empty street outside, thunder rumbling in the distance. In an old notebook, I wrote, "I don't need anyone to save me. I'll become the person they have to beg for help." The ink bled from the rain that splashed through the cracks, but I still keep that notebook to this day as a silent vow I once made to myself. There were nights when I broke down crying without even knowing why. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was loneliness. Sometimes it was just the ache of wanting a simple phone call, a goodnight message, or even a hug. But no one called. My parents never asked where I was, never wondered if I was safe. In their eyes, I was probably just the stubborn daughter who would come crawling back once she failed. That silence, absolute and complete, taught me something. There was no going back. If I fell, no one would reach out to catch me. Over time, I learned to live with extreme simplicity. I bought secondhand clothes, cut my hair short to save time, and ate just one proper meal a day. But within that hardship, I found something pure, a version of myself that finally felt real. No more comparisons, no more judgment, no more looks of disappointment. Just me and the endless lines of code running across a dark screen, numbers and logic I could control, the only things in my life that ever made sense. Sometimes, after the cafe closed, I'd secretly use the Wi-Fi to download more study materials, learning advanced programming on my own. I'd read, try, fail, and start over. On the nights I got the code to finally work, I'd treat myself to a cup of warm coffee and write a small line on the wall. One step closer. After 6 months, I had the first demo of Havenlink. It was rough, unfinished, but it worked. And to me, that was proof that I still had worth. I lost count of how many times I asked myself, if they saw this, would they be proud? But every time that question surfaced, I pushed it away. I didn't need their pride. What I wanted was for them to remember me one day, not with pity, but with regret. One autumn morning, as sunlight streamed through the small window, I sat staring at a digital map of Austin, where hundreds of red dots marked the apartments being tested on the Havenlink platform. Every time a transaction went through, my phone made a soft ping. Each sound filled me with a quiet joy, not because of the money, but because it reminded me that this was something I had built entirely on my own. No one had believed in it, no one had funded it, and yet, it worked. I began to realize that their contempt had become the very fuel for my dream. If my father hadn't said, "You'll never amount to anything," I might never have found the courage to leave Dallas. If my mother hadn't told me, "You're not the successful type," I might still be living in that old room, trying to earn their approval. While I was working tirelessly, building Havenlink one line of code at a time, life in another part of Texas just 4 hours away was starting to unravel. Lily and Brandon, the golden couple of the Grant family, had just moved into a luxurious condo in downtown Houston worth over $300,000, the same money my parents had drained from their savings and retirement fund to invest in their beloved daughter. I didn't know it at the time, but later, when everything collapsed, I would understand. Every dollar they once used to belittle me had been burned away on their own dinner tables. Lily had always loved luxury. She posted pictures, daily wine parties, European trips, new cars, designer bags. Her husband Brandon, a young and overly confident real estate investor, bragged to anyone who would listen that he was running a high-end housing development company. My father proudly shared his posts on Facebook, captioning them with, "My son-in-law is transforming the real estate scene in Houston." My mother never missed a chance to boast to the neighbors, "My Lily is so talented. She's exactly the success we always dreamed she'd be." But what no one saw behind those glamorous photos was the waste and arrogance that fueled them. Brandon had been using money from his investors' fund to buy sports cars, host lavish parties, and take endless luxury vacations. Lily knew, but she didn't intervene. She told her friends, "Brandon's a financial genius. He knows how to make money work for him." She believed that their extravagant lifestyle was a well-earned reward for their hard work, even though most of it was paid for with my parents' money. Then the real estate market began to crash. One of Brandon's projects collapsed completely due to permit violations. His partners sued him for financial fraud and misuse of investor funds, triggering a wave of debt and public scrutiny. I still remember how I first heard the news through a random article I stumbled upon while sitting in a cafe in Austin. The headline read, "Young Houston developer faces allegations of fund misuse." I scrolled down, and when I saw the name Brandon Keene, my heart skipped a beat. Not out of satisfaction, but disbelief. I had grown so used to seeing Lily and Brandon as untouchable, the perfect, polished pair, that it almost didn't seem real that everything could crumble in just one summer. When Brandon lost everything, Lily was listed as a co-liable party because she had signed several contracts under his name. The condo they once flaunted online with perfect lighting and elegant angles was seized by the court. She sold her wedding jewelry, her luxury handbags, even the engagement ring my mother had proudly shown to everyone. Brandon, unable to handle the scandal and pressure, declared bankruptcy and disappeared, leaving Lily alone amid a mountain of unpaid bills. I later heard from an old neighbor in Dallas that Lily had called my mother, sobbing into the phone, "I don't know what to do, they're taking everything. Brandon's gone, Mom." And of course, my parents, the same people who once told me that investments require vision, drained the rest of their retirement savings to help Lily get back on her feet. They sold their car, mortgaged their old house, and used every penny to pay off her debts. My mother even told the neighbors, "Lily's just going through a rough patch. That's what family is for, to get through things together." No one mentioned me. No one remembered that I, too, once had to get through it alone. But the cruelest part was this: the crisis that year didn't stop with Lily. When the financial market collapsed, my father was pulled under by the very debt he had guaranteed for his son-in-law. Interest rates soared, their retirement funds vanished, and eventually, they lost the Dallas house altogether. The home that had once been their pride, with its perfectly trimmed lawn my father used to mow every Sunday morning, now stood with a "for sale" sign out front. When the bank officials came to seal the property, my mother stood on the porch, watching as the Grant nameplate was taken down, tears streaming silently down her face. And here's the bitter irony. One of the real estate companies they borrowed from to bail Lily out was actually a subsidiary of HavenLink. When I expanded HavenLink, I acquired several smaller firms specializing in rental property management, including Bridgepoint Realty, the company my parents had taken their loan from. Of course, they had no idea. When my father signed the paperwork, he glanced at the name on the file. Avery G. He even asked the loan officer, "Who's that? Sounds young." The man simply replied, "One of the executive directors at HavenLink, sir." My father nodded, completely unaware that Avery G. was the same daughter he once told would never accomplish anything. When I found out, I didn't laugh. I just sat there quietly, staring at the report on my screen. The line read, "Client: Mark and Linda Grant, loan default, property seized." The words were sharp, clinical, and final. I thought I would feel triumphant, but I didn't. What I felt was something heavier, a deep, quiet sorrow, like watching a familiar house slowly collapse in the rain. They had built the wall that separated us, and now, that very wall had fallen and crushed them beneath it. 2 years later, my world had completely changed. From a small, peeling-walled apartment with a makeshift desk, I now stood in the grand hall of the San Francisco Convention Center, attending the prestigious Women in Tech Awards. I still remember the moment the host announced my name. The youngest CEO in digital real estate, founder of HavenLink, Avery Grant. Applause erupted like a wave, camera flashes filled the room, and as I stepped onto the stage under the bright lights, my palms trembled slightly, but my heart felt astonishingly calm. I had once imagined this moment would make me cry, but instead, what I felt was not pride, it was peace, the kind that comes after a long storm finally passes. Standing under the spotlight, facing hundreds of faces, entrepreneurs, investors, journalists, I spoke slowly, with a voice steadier than I ever thought I had. 4 years ago, someone told me I would never amount to anything. But the beautiful thing about being underestimated is this: if you learn to turn it into fuel, it can light up your entire path. The crowd laughed softly, then erupted into sustained applause. I didn't have to mention my parents. I didn't have to name anyone. Yet somehow, every word landed exactly where I wanted, in the hearts of those who had once been dismissed, overlooked, or told they weren't enough. That speech spread quickly across the media. Articles called me the girl who was once underestimated, now the youngest female CEO in digital real estate. Tech journals, financial outlets, even morning TV shows picked up the story. I received hundreds of messages. Congratulations, partnership offers, interviews. But among all the words of praise and opportunity, there was one message that made me stop and stare for a very long time. On the phone screen was a name I hadn't seen in years: Mom. The message was short, only a few lines, but I read it over and over again. "We're proud of you, sweetheart. Can we see you?" Beneath it was a single heart emoji, the first one she had ever sent me. I didn't reply right away. I sat in the hotel room, staring out at the city lights flickering beyond the window, and felt a strange mix of emotions. A part of me wanted to laugh because, after all this time, they were the ones reaching out. But another part, deeper and quieter, just felt a soft ache, as if I could see the old version of myself standing in the corner of the room, waiting for a hug that would never come. I thought about all those years, the damp little apartment, the sleepless nights coding until dawn, the tears that had fallen onto my keyboard. They hadn't been there. They hadn't called, hadn't asked, hadn't believed. And now, when the whole world finally knew my name, they said they were proud. I didn't feel angry, just empty. Because it turned out their love came with a switch, one that only turned on when the spotlight did. I set my phone down and stepped out onto the balcony. The breeze was gentle, carrying the faint scent of the San Francisco Bay. Below, the city shimmered as if no one had ever been left behind. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and remembered a line I once wrote in my old journal. "I don't need anyone to save me. I'll become the person they have to beg for." Maybe this was that moment. But I didn't feel victorious. I just felt like I had finally gone far enough that I no longer needed to prove anything. The next morning, I sat in front of my laptop, staring at my mother's message again. I typed a sentence, deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I wrote, "Okay. Tomorrow afternoon. In Austin." I chose Austin because it was the city that had raised me the second time around, the place where I learned how to stand without anyone to hold me up. I didn't know exactly what I wanted from that meeting: an apology, acknowledgement, or maybe just one last look before closing the chapter for good. But I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't meeting them for revenge. I was meeting them to finally put an end to the story. The next day, when the plane touched down in Austin, I carried only a small handbag, not the kind of designer luggage the other women in the first-class cabin had brought. I chose a seat by the window, watching sunlight pour through layers of clouds. In that quiet moment, I thought of the old house in Dallas, of those dinners where Lily's laughter drowned out my voice, of my parents, two people who were never truly cruel, just blinded by the belief that love could be measured by achievement. That afternoon, I returned to the Havenlink office. My team greeted me with flowers, and Ethan, my first investor and now one of my closest friends, smiled and said, "Well, Miss Forbes, looks like they finally see you for who you are." I gave a small laugh and replied, "No. They just finally see that I exist." He didn't say anything else, just placed a hand on my shoulder, a simple gesture, yet enough to remind me that not everyone in this world is like them. That evening, I went home to my small penthouse in the city center. It wasn't extravagant, but every corner carried a piece of me: an abstract painting on the wall, the wooden desk I built myself, and on the bookshelf, that old journal still waiting. I opened it to the first page, where the ink-stained words still read, "I don't need anyone to save me." Beneath it, I wrote a new line. "But I will still listen just to know that I've truly stepped out of the dark." End of setting. The next morning, I chose a simple dress, tied my hair neatly, and drove to the cafe my mother had mentioned in her follow-up message. On the way there, the radio replayed my speech from the awards ceremony the night before. The host's voice echoed, "An inspiring journey from being underestimated to leading an industry." I switched it off and smiled faintly. "Inspiring," I murmured to myself. Sure, maybe. But deep down, I knew today wasn't about success or recognition. Today was about closure, one final moment to face the people who once believed I'd never make it, and to realize that I had gone so far, they might not even recognize me anymore. As my car turned down the sunlit street lined with oak trees, where the little cafe sat tucked away beneath the shade, my heartbeat slowed. I knew that in just a few minutes, I would come face to face with my past, not to seek revenge, but to say goodbye to the girl I once was, the one who cried in her room believing she would never be enough. Now, I was different. I wasn't the girl who needed to be seen anymore. The cafe sat on the corner of South Congress Avenue, where the Austin sunlight filtered through the leaves, scattering golden reflections across the glass windows. It was a quiet place, filled more with peace than tension, and I realized that was probably why my mother had chosen it. When I pushed the door open, the small bell above the frame chimed softly, and I saw them, my father, my mother, and Lily sitting at a table near the window. The sight made me pause for a moment. 4 years apart, and they looked far older than I remembered. My father seemed thinner, his hair streaked with gray, his once proud eyes now hollowed and tired. My mother still carried her air of composure, but the way her hands were clasped tightly together betrayed a faint tremor. And Lily. I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who had once been the flawless symbol of the Grant family now sat hunched and quiet, her hair messy, her cheeks sunken, a cheap plastic watch around her wrist, replacing the Cartier she used to flaunt on Instagram. All three of them stood when I approached. My mother forced a small smile, while my father spoke first, his voice still trying to carry the authority it once had. "You look different." I replied softly, "I'd like to think it's for the better," then took a seat. A long silence followed, broken only by the faint clinking of a spoon stirring coffee at a nearby table. Lily kept her head down, avoiding my eyes. I could see her hands trembling slightly, and my mother glanced at me carefully, as if trying to read my mood. I knew what they were hoping for, the same quiet compliance I had shown as a child. But that girl no longer existed. My father was the one to break the silence. "The house was foreclosed," he said, not meeting my gaze. "Your mother, your sister, and I. We don't really have a place right now. We've been staying with a friend for a few days, but we can't stay there forever. We were hoping you could help." He spoke quickly, as though afraid that if he hesitated, the words would choke him. My mother added, her voice trembling slightly, "Lily's been through enough already. Brandon's gone, and she's been staying with friends. She really has nothing left." I turned to look at Lily. She still stared down at her clasped hands, her eyes unfocused. I remembered the Lily I used to know, the one who always stood tall, spoke loudly, and commanded every room she entered. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone hollowed out by her own downfall. I didn't feel joy. Not even a trace of satisfaction. Just an eerie calm, like watching a familiar play being performed again, only this time from the audience. My father continued, his voice lower now, worn and uncertain. "We know we weren't fair to you before. But things are different now, we're still a family, and we need each other." He stopped, waiting for me to respond, but I stayed silent. Finally, I lifted my coffee cup, watching the thin layer of foam swirl on the surface, and said quietly, "Back then, it was $300,000 to help Lily start her new life. So tell me, how much does it cost this time for you to start over?" My question landed in the air, heavy, still, and sharp enough that the faint clink of a spoon at the next table sounded deafening. My father froze. My mother opened her mouth, tears welling at the corners of her eyes. "Sweetheart, we're family," she whispered, her voice trembling. I set my cup down and looked straight at them. "Family isn't something you turn to when it's convenient, Mom." My voice was calm, not raised, but every word cut clean and deep. "When I was in Austin alone, with no home, nothing but an old laptop, did either of you call me? When I sent that email about Havenlink, did you reply? When I stood at my college graduation, where were you? Family doesn't just show up when they need something. That's not love, that's convenience." My mother broke into quiet sobs, pressing a hand to her mouth. My father tried to maintain composure, but I could see the whitened knuckles gripping the edge of the table. Lily looked up for the first time, her eyes red and swollen. "Avery." Her voice cracked, rough and fragile. "I know I was wrong. Brandon. He lied to me. I've lost everything. If I could go back, I'd never let Mom and Dad." I raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. "You don't have to explain. I'm not angry. I just don't believe anymore." No one spoke after that. The silence between us was almost tangible. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting pale golden lines across the table. Outside, people walked by, laughing, carrying on with their lives, the kind of life my family had somehow lost along the way. When I looked back, my mother's head was bowed, tears falling onto a crumpled napkin, and my father was staring at me not as the stern man who once demanded perfection, but as someone who had finally realized that everything he believed in had quietly fallen apart. I exhaled slowly and stood up. "I don't hate you," I said, my voice calm. "I just don't have space for you in my life anymore." I placed some cash on the table. "I'll get this one. Think of it as the first time I've ever invested in the family." The line made my father lift his head, but he didn't respond. I turned and walked away, hearing the scrape of a chair behind me. Maybe my mother had wanted to call out, but no words came. I didn't look back. Stepping outside, the Austin afternoon sun was so bright it stung my eyes. I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. There was no sense of triumph in that moment, only clarity after years of pain. In my mind, my father's old words echoed, "No one invests in someone without vision." I smiled faintly. Maybe he had been wrong. I was living proof that sometimes vision isn't about how far you can see, it's about having the courage to walk away from the people who never saw you at all. Behind me, the cafe doorbell chimed softly one last time before closing. Everything ended quietly, no shouting, no anger. Just silence, truth, and the feeling of a chapter closing for good. After that meeting, I thought it was all behind me. But a few weeks later, while reviewing Havenlink's internal rental reports, 3 familiar names caught my eye. Mark Grant, Linda Grant, and Lily Keene. I froze, staring at the screen. They had just rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Austin through my own platform. The irony hit hard. I didn't know whether to laugh or sigh. They probably hadn't meant to find me. They'd simply chosen the cheapest option, a place that allowed monthly payments with a low deposit. I checked the file. The apartment was listed by one of Havenlink's subsidiary companies, rented for $1,200 a month, modestly furnished, located in a middle-income neighborhood. The kind of area my mother once dismissed as where people with no ambition end up. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the line on the screen. Tenant, Grant family. Below it, the system note read, "Approved by management." Lease duration, 12 months. I could have stopped it. One click, and the application would have been flagged as unqualified. But I didn't. I just smiled, not out of revenge, but with a quiet sense that life itself had taken care of the balance I never needed to enforce. A few days later, I drove through that neighborhood not out of curiosity, but because a part of me needed to see it for myself. The building was humble, 3 stories tall, painted a fading shade of yellow, with rusted iron railings along the balconies. I spotted Lily standing in the courtyard, talking on the phone. Her once glossy blonde hair now hung unevenly at her shoulders, dyed a dull brown, dry and tangled. She wore a worn-out blouse and faded jeans. Her movements were clumsy, drained of the elegance she once flaunted. I stopped the car a distance away, watching through the window. When the wind blew, she lifted her head, and for a fleeting moment, I saw her eyes, the same eyes I'd known all my life. But now stripped of the confidence that used to silence an entire room the moment she walked in. I drove away before she could notice me. On the road back, I realized the feeling inside me was no longer anger. It was something softer, a quiet sadness, tinged with pity. Not because they were struggling, but because they still didn't understand that everything around them now, every brick, every door, every lease they signed carried the mark of the daughter they once said was going nowhere. Every now and then, the customer service team would send me a report. Grant family payments on time, no complaints. I never intervened. But sometimes I'd open the owner's note section, the internal notes left for property owners. There was one I'd written long ago, just a single line. Sometimes, karma doesn't knock. It builds the house you'll have to rent. Each time I read it, I felt a kind of quiet irony, gentle, almost like a smile closing the door behind itself. One morning, I was invited to the opening ceremony of Havenlink's new branch in downtown Austin. The company had rented a massive billboard along the I-35 freeway not far from the neighborhood where Lily and my parents now lived. The advertisement featured a photo of me, dressed in a white suit, hair cropped short, looking straight into the camera with the slogan, "Find your haven. Build your life." That day, the marketing team texted me. "The billboard is up, great response so far." I smiled, barely giving it another thought. But a few days later, one of the field staff sent in an image report, and in the photo, there was a woman standing beneath the billboard, staring up at it for a long time. I zoomed in. It was Lily. She stood in the sun, shielding her eyes with her hand as she looked up at my face on the giant banner. I didn't know if she recognized me. The woman in that picture looked so different from the sister she once knew, short hair, calm eyes, a quiet confidence that had replaced the timid girl with the old laptop. But something in Lily's stance made me think she felt it even if she couldn't name what it was. She looked up for a long moment, then lowered her head and walked away. I still keep that photo. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the silence of time holds far more power than any confrontation ever could. In the weeks that followed, I learned that Lily was looking for work. She had applied to several small companies in the area, but each one turned her down. Her personal bankruptcy and the pending lawsuit involving Brandon made it nearly impossible for her to get hired anywhere. One of Havenlink's HR managers later told me they had interviewed her for a receptionist position, but when the system ran her background check, it automatically flagged her as high credit risk. She was rejected before the interviewer ever saw her face. I stayed silent for a long time after hearing that. Not because it pleased me, but because real life has a way of delivering punishment with a subtlety that feels almost cruel. My parents were still living with her in that same apartment. According to the internal reports, they usually paid rent on time, sometimes a few days late. There were months when they requested extensions, with notes that read, "Seeking temporary employment." I read those lines and felt no anger, only a strange calmness. They didn't know that the person approving those requests was me. I signed them off with my initials, A.G., and pressed confirm. A small, invisible act, yet it held the full measure of how much I had changed. I wasn't seeking revenge, I was simply watching. One evening, as I drove past their neighborhood again, the Havenlink billboard still glowed brightly, the night wind making the fabric sway gently. I stopped the car for a moment and looked up at my own face illuminated in golden light. Below, a few apartment windows were still lit. Maybe they were having dinner, maybe it was my family. I didn't need to know. All I felt was relief. Because for the first time in my life, I finally understood what freedom truly meant, not being above them, but no longer needing them at all. I went home, opened my laptop, and checked the tenant list. Their names were still there, among thousands of others. In the middle of all those numbers, my story suddenly felt small but complete. When I finally closed the computer, I knew. Every cycle had come full circle, every debt had been settled not with money, but with silence and dignity. That spring, Austin bloomed brighter than ever. The oak trees along the river were sprouting new leaves, and the morning light filled the Havenlink office with warmth. I still came to work as usual, even though the company no longer needed me there every day. But I liked the feeling of sitting in that glass-walled room, overlooking the city, every street, every building a reminder of the road I had walked. Sometimes, I thought about my parents, not with anger or bitterness, but with a calm acceptance, the kind you feel when you look at an old scar. It used to hurt, but now it simply proves that you survived. One afternoon, while reviewing the customer database, I saw their names appear under the overdue payments section. They were 3 months behind on rent, barely $4,000 in total. According to company policy, the system would automatically send a termination notice. The words "pending eviction" blinked in red across the screen. For a moment, hundreds of thoughts ran through my mind. I could let it happen, let the process play out as it always did, fair and impersonal, the way the world tends to be. But then a quieter part of me, the softer part, the one that still believed kindness doesn't need to be announced, chose differently. I opened the tenant support panel and typed a short note. Deduct the remaining balance from the Resident Hardship Fund. Then I signed it. AG. No one knew it was me. The accounting team assumed it was just another automated waiver in the system. The next day, the report appeared on my screen. Grant family, debt cleared. I read it once more and smiled faintly. Not because I wanted to forgive them, but because I refused to let hatred have even one more minute of power over me. I never went to see them again. I never sent a message. I knew that sometimes, distance is the kindest gift you can give to those who once hurt you. They needed to learn how to live in silence the same way I once had. And I needed to learn how to let go, not because they deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved freedom. In the months that followed, Havenlink expanded into 2 new states. Ethan, now my co-executive, asked me one day, "Do you ever think they'll find out?" I shook my head. There's no need. If they did, they'd think everything I built was for revenge. But I didn't build Havenlink to prove them wrong. I built it to remind myself that belief in yourself is stronger than any doubt others can throw at you. He was quiet for a while, then said softly, "That's what makes you different from them." I smiled, looking out the window, where the evening light spilled across the city's glass towers, warm and calm, like a flame that had finally burned itself out. Later that night, I stood alone on my balcony. The city below shimmered in a sea of lights, cars tracing ribbons of color that stretched endlessly into the distance. I rested my hand on the railing, feeling the cool wind brush through my short hair. Somewhere far below, someone laughed, and faint music drifted from a bar a few blocks away. Life went on as if no one had ever hurt anyone. And in that quiet moment, I realized I was finally free. I thought back to the day I left Dallas, the old suitcase, the $5,000 I had saved, and the words, "You'll never amount to anything." I remembered the long nights spent alone in front of my screen, the glow of code flickering in the dark, and the moments when loneliness almost broke me. But now, none of it hurt anymore. Those memories had turned into the very bricks that built the road leading me here. Without them, I might still be that fragile girl in an old garage, begging for approval. But because of them, I learned how to give that approval to myself. From my pocket, I took out a small folded paper, a page torn from my old journal that I still carried. I don't need anyone to save me. I'll become the person they have to beg for. I looked at those words and smiled, not because the prophecy had come true, but because I had gone far beyond it. I didn't need them to beg anymore. I just needed to be strong enough to never have to prove anything again. In the distance, Austin's city lights shimmered over the surface of the Colorado River, sparkling like thousands of fallen stars. I whispered, almost to myself, "If anyone ever tells you that you'll never become anything, just smile and let time answer for you." The words left my lips softly, carried away by the wind, a small echo of a long journey, one made by those who were underestimated yet chose to rise anyway. I turned back inside and closed the balcony door behind me. The room was quiet, filled only with the steady ticking of the clock. I felt lighter, as if I had finally set down the weight I'd carried for years. There was no anger, no regret, only gratitude. Gratitude for the wounds that made me stronger, and even for the ones who turned away, because they unknowingly taught me that love isn't about validation, it's about the courage to be yourself. And when I turned off the lights, the darkness wrapped around the room, but I didn't feel afraid. I knew I had outgrown the need for someone else's light to guide my way. Now, that light was within me, and I would keep it, not to shine back on those who once caused me pain, but to illuminate the path ahead, where forgiveness, self-respect, and faith are no longer lessons, but a way of life. To you, the one who's been underestimated, compared, or forced to live in the shadow of someone else's perfect child. Remember, your worth isn't defined by how they see you, but by how you rise after they've tried to break you. Some families will never apologize, but time will by proving that silence, perseverance, and self-belief are stronger than any words of doubt. Don't let unfairness turn you bitter, let it shape you into someone they can no longer ignore. And one day, when you walk past them with a calm smile, you'll understand that the most beautiful revenge isn't making them regret what they did, it's living a life that's free, peaceful, and entirely your own. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.